there was this founder that was basically, I guess, proud of the fact that he was on his laptop like up to 5 minutes before he had to take some sort of grave surgery. And then after he woke up, like 5 minutes later, he was back on his laptop and he was basically saying how like great dedication that is.
When I was a VC investor, I was really big on ensuring that, if you don't take care of the founders' health and kind of well-being and make sure that they've got downtime and good guardrails around kind of time spent in the business, you're going to have a bigger problem in the relatively near future. Like, I'm a big believer that it's not necessarily about the amount of hours you work, but how productive you are in those hours. So yeah, I don't think it's VC driven. I think it's probably more driven by social media, especially if you look at like the comments on, the posts that are on LinkedIn now. The stuff that seems to do well is either you should be doing like 996, kind of killing yourself, do every hour, pour every hour into the business.
All right, so I just sent you, I guess, share the post with you on LinkedIn that was already taken down. It's really weird. But there was this founder that was basically, I guess, proud of the fact that he was on his laptop like up to 5 minutes before he had to take some sort of grave surgery. And then after he woke up, like 5 minutes later, he was back on his laptop and he was basically saying how like great dedication that is. And when I was reading until the end of this post, I was hoping there would be some irony at the end, but there was not. And what's worse, there were like 100+ comments on it, and most of them were like, yeah, man, that's what you do when you own a business. And I know you're coming from the VC background, so I wanted to ask you, how do you think founders arrive at this sort of decision that it's like all or nothing, you got to kill yourself for your business, quite literally?
Yeah, so I don't think it's driven by VCs. Like, when I was a VC investor, I was really big on ensuring that, if you don't take care of the founders' health and kind of well-being and make sure that they've got downtime and good guardrails around kind of time spent in the business, you're going to have a bigger problem in the relatively near future. Like, I'm a big believer that it's not necessarily about the amount of hours you work, but how productive you are in those hours. So yeah, I don't think it's VC driven. I think it's probably more driven by social media, especially if you look at like the comments on, the posts that are on LinkedIn now. The stuff that seems to do well is either you should be doing like 996, kind of killing yourself, do every hour, pour every hour into the business because someone in Silicon Valley is working kind of longer than you, or you
Right.
get the stuff where it's like, no, actually, you should get up, enjoy your morning coffee, go for a long walk, log on at 12, like sell some sort of product solution, and then by 3 o'clock you're finished, and then go back and walk the hills and go to the gym and do that other stuff. The reality for like 99% of people is that neither of them two extremes are what you should be doing or is what most people are doing. But I just think it's fueled by those real polarizing views on social media, and I guess that's the stuff that gets a lot of the traction, sadly, isn't it? Nobody says, actually, I kind of get up, I do my 9 to 5 ish, I'll go back on for a few hours of the evening. When it's busy, I work a little bit over the weekend, but I try not to do that every week. Just none of that seems to resonate, does it? And now it's kind of driving this really polarizing view of what being a founder actually looks like.
So you think it's basically like not glamorous enough to be popularized, just like being a boring person doing, I guess, like the same thing every day, and it just doesn't sound sexy enough for social media.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, yeah, I don't know what kind of works and what doesn't on social media now, but I do feel like, yeah, no one talks about the bit in between. And you can draw parallels to that with like, it's not just kind of founders hours, but it's exits, it's fundraising, it's like everything. It's just a real either business has got to be worth like 10 billion or it's going to fail. Well, that's not the reality for most companies. So yeah, I just think it's the extreme ends of the stick that tend to get the traction, and then sadly, the more traction that stuff gets, then the more people see it, and it just becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling loop.
Right. So when you were back on the VC scene, did you see it as a red flag in the founders who were like super intense, all about, I don't know, working those crazy hours and whatnot?
I wouldn't say I saw it as a red flag. I actually didn't see it. It's not as, I mean, there's two bits. I don't think it happens as much as people think. And then Secondly, like as a VC, especially like while I was in VC, like first year, it was like 6 months, the first 6 months I was in VC, you couldn't even leave your house. So like, it wasn't like you was kind of in an office to see all of that stuff. I mean, the founders that I worked with, they all worked, they all put a lot of hard graft in, but I think there was a semblance of people used to take the weekends and I just didn't see it. And if it happened, I didn't see it. Yeah, that's probably where kind of my view of it was.
Do you think there should be a little bit more, I guess, exposure between the founders and VCs so you can like spot problems like that early before they actually like before people crash and burn?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of difficult because I didn't see that, but I also don't think that happened a lot with the founders that I was working with. Like I said, they worked hard when they needed to, but I don't think there was stuff. Everyone gets busy, right? Every job gets busy, and for the majority of us, when it gets busy, there is a natural tendency to just like increase the hours, and you can do that for a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever your kind of personal threshold is. But I think there's very few people that can just do like 100-hour weeks every single week and not be burnt out. So I don't think I worked with anyone that was doing 100-hour weeks for 12 months or anything like that. So should there be more of a mechanism so people can spot it? Maybe, but I think there's a bit of selection bias in my data because I just don't think they were the kind of founders I was working with.
So, what motivated you to step out of the fund that you were working at and basically do your own thing?
I just realized that I don't think VC was really a role that I kind of fully enjoyed anymore. So there's like three main bits to VC role. You've got to find deals and assess them. You've got to actually transact those deals and then support those businesses after the investment. So I enjoyed the first bit. Like everyone loves going out and networking with founders and hearing about all the different weird and wonderful businesses that they're doing. I absolutely love the end bit because I think that was the real part where you could get validation and feedback as to kind of how you thought about stuff, which was the
Hmm.
more building phase, the hands-on support. And then I absolutely hated the bit in between. Like I didn't like writing investment memos, didn't like kind of going and getting into the weeds of every last bit of due diligence. I didn't like kind of negotiating legal docs with founders. That just wasn't my bag. Like I just wanted to be fundamentally supporting founders and helping them grow their business. Now, when I first got into VC, the fund that I worked for was a very, very early stage fund, and you got to do a lot more of the building. And
Right.
then that fund had come to an end, so I kind of moved internally into a fund that was a little bit more late stage, and that meant more and more of that kind of deal process, due diligence kind of type part of the role, which just wasn't me. So I thought, what do I want to do? I want to either be in a proper pre-seed kind of fund, where you're backing pre-revenue businesses that have, 4 or 5 people teams that have just shipped amazing products, but they've not yet really kind of tested or validated that commercially. And when I look around the market in the UK, there's probably 5 funds that fit that bucket, and they're all based out of London. And I didn't want to move down to London. So then it was, how do I get that kind of exposure, and how do I get that enjoyment of working with businesses without moving. So I decided to kind of leave October 2024 to set up my own advisory business. And now I do a couple of different things, but like in the main, it's kind of fractional chief of staff type roles in early stage B2B software businesses. Just getting involved, getting your hands dirty. And some stuff goes well, some stuff goes less well. But you really feel like you're kind of in it making a difference. I think VC for me, I always felt like if something went wrong, I'd kind of kick myself and go, I should have spotted that. But if something went well, I never really used to take the credit for it anyway, because it's the founders and it's people in the business that are kind of doing the doing. Whereas now I feel like what I'm doing, the lows are definitely lower because you're like, oh, I can't believe I've missed that, and I was closer to it, so I should have seen more of the detail. But then actually, when something goes well, you're like, okay, yeah, I've contributed to that. I've kind of been, I've been in the room. I just think as an investor, you're always kind of one step removed, which is great for some people, but it wasn't what I wanted to do.
What are the like main problems that you're solving as chief of staff?
A lot of it ends up being kind of operational focus. So the businesses that I work with typically have either raised a seed or Series A, raised a pre-seed or a seed round, and they've got kind of the bootstrapped, but they're doing at least sort of 50 to 100k of MRR. And I find those businesses are at like a really weird inflection point where they've gone from the founder or founders can kind of be in every single meeting, they can make a lot of the decisions, and now they need to start to kind of extract themselves and put a bit more process around what they're doing. So things like setting OKRs and KPIs, things like having a way of actually tangibly managing the management team. Because when you're a 5-10 person business, you don't need any of that, right? You kind of know who's performing, who's not. But unless you're going to kind of stay down in the detail of everything, which just then means things doesn't get done, kind of stepping back from that a little bit. So yeah, help a lot around that kind of team structuring, accountability, dashboard building, all that other stuff. Naturally, I get involved in a lot of things when the businesses that I work with are raising the next fundraising round. So I don't do any kind of fundraising specific engagements, but obviously for my clients that I work with on an ongoing basis, they're usually trying to kind of drive to that next event. And the big challenge for founders is that's a full-time job, as is running the business. So being able to kind of share the load and take some of that off them really helps. And then at a more tactical level, there's been a lot around kind of pricing that I've got involved in with my clients. Most people say, oh, we're not charging right, we're not capturing all the value, but they don't really necessarily have a framework for working out how to do that better. And, pricing is a science, not an art.
Right.
So ending up doing a lot of like speaking to customers, researching the market, kind of all that other good stuff. And then I also sometimes feel a bit of a gap if they've got like an outsourced FD and they kind of get the numbers, but the FD sort of stops at preparing the numbers. They don't really then look at how that plays into how we think about strategy, where we should invest more, where we should invest less, all that other stuff. So it's quite a complex role, and it's slightly different for different clients, but essentially just working with the founders to ensure, to work out what are the big things that need doing, and then to help them set a framework and actually get them done.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you yourself kind of like, I'm going to use this line from Great Gatsby, when he was seeing the green light across the river, just basically knowing where he wants to be. So it sounds like you kind of knew what you wanted out of your, I guess, professional life in terms of what motivates you. And what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you think it's still quite important for the startups, even at that like messy stage, to have some sort of let's put it like in one bracket, goal, and like understand where they're going, rather than just, okay, let's go and figure it out later. Because I've definitely seen, I think, both scenarios.
Yeah, so I think, and I don't mean this in a bad way to any founders, because it's the hardest job in the world, and I always say I can probably do 1 out of 10 things better than they can, and they can do the other 9 out of 10 well. But what I find is they've usually got like a 3 or 5 year plan of where they want to be, and then they've got kind of what we do this week, today, this week, this month, maybe this quarter. But there's not, there's a lot of urgency to do that kind of short term stuff, and they hope if they do all that short term stuff, you can keep kind of rolling through that, and then you get to where you want at the end of the plan. Whereas I almost try and bring that kind of 12 to 18 months ish lens. And then by doing that, they end up doing less, but the stuff that they do is that it's usually the bigger things that kind of contribute to overall success. And just running a lot of experiments, marketing, go to market, especially, it's kind of easy in the early days to go, we just need customers. We've got to find them. We'll find them any which way we can. That's great, and that's definitely stage 1. But then stage 2 is how do you refine that? Who's your actual ICP? How do you think about which marketing channels are working? Kind of all that other stuff, and it requires that sort of data, more analytical take on it. But it's so hard to do that from within the business. Like it's kind of like if you're a therapist and you've got a problem, you can't deal with it yourself, right? You've got to go and see somebody else. It's a similar sort of analogy. I think you need someone that's one step removed from the business. I usually do 1, maximum 2 days, but more frequently kind of 1.5 days a week. So I've still got the external context. I still see 3 or 4 different businesses a week, and then we can kind of use that external benchmark as to how that, to help think about how we kind of drive that individual business.
So in those early stage businesses, how realistic do you think you can really like set goals and make projections, considering that most of the time like half of the data is missing and you're just kind of operating from mostly uncertainty?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you can set goals and you're absolutely not going to hit all of them, but it's about putting a framework in place as to why we're not hitting those goals. And then you can actually properly make interventions with that. So if you take the view of we're not going to hit our goals, so we're not going to put it in place, how do you know what's working and how do you know what's not working? Whereas like one of my clients, we only have a monthly meeting, as a kind of, with the wider management team. And there's quite a lot of stuff that won't move on, but you're then forced to have the conversation of, why has this not moved forward? Well, actually, we've deprioritized it because we're doing this. But then that's a forum to go, well, does that bit make sense? So, yeah, it's not about kind of whipping anyone and saying, you said you was going to do this, you've not done it. But it is forcing the conversation of, if we've not done it and we've prioritized something else, why have we prioritized something else? Or if we was, or if we thought we was going to ship X new features in 3 months and we've only done half of that, what's the reason for that? Is it because we've not scoped things very well? Is it because the dev team are not doing a good job? Or actually, is it because we're doing everything perfectly, but we just don't have enough people? And then you've got kind of different ways in, different things you can do on the back of each of those.
Because you can also go back and reassess the goal itself, right? To make the conclusion whether or not this was realistic in the first place.
Yeah, agreed.
Because I've definitely, like in my experience, I've seen it very many times. Like you always try to find a problem with the execution, but then once you finally pull all the pieces together, you're like, well, this was never going to happen in the first place. And we just really overestimated, kind of like the human capacity and all of that.
Yeah, and I think there's different bits. Like I always, one of the things I kind of try and do as part of my role is to sort of push back and go, are there different ways of doing that? So like, I've had it a few times where a client gone, well, we've got a problem in this part of the business and we need to invest to solve that, but we've not got enough cash. So you're like, okay, so then we either need to deprioritize it and do that for later, or is the answer we need to go out and raise more cash? Like there's always like 2 or 3 different ways of looking at it. And yeah, multiple of them options will be right if executed in the right way. But I just think ensuring that there's proper, well, what if, then we can kind of get everything out on the table. And the bit that I don't have to do is, there's so many smart minds in the businesses that I work with, like they'll solve the problem. It's just someone sitting there and going, well, what if this, just to get them to kind of get all that knowledge on the table, and then they quickly come to the right answer.
I really like that. And I think you mentioned it in your notes that basically, I guess like you don't necessarily have a mental model per se, but you really play out with this what if scenarios. How do founders actively engage with it? Like, do they understand the importance of this, I guess, scenario simulation, for the lack of a better word?
The ones that I work on definitely do. I think what I offer is a little bit unique. And if I had to go out and find 30, 40 clients, I think it'd be really difficult. But I only kind of 3 or 4. And it's a really good kind of mixture, because what happens is they kind of, it's sort of the ones that want to work with me, I know are the ones that are going to kind of take on that advice. If you don't see the value in it, you're not going to benefit from it. But if you don't see the value, you're probably not going to pay for it. So it kind of works quite well for me. We don't always get to the answer that I think's right, but that's fine, because there's usually 6 of us in the room, right? So you shouldn't have the best idea all the time. But I do find that whatever answer we get to is backed by data and some level of logic. And like you say, the data set's flawed, right? You're never going to have enough data in an early stage business to be 100% certain on stuff. But if we can get enough of that kind of information, and we can talk about it, and we can kind of get it out in the ether, if we can go from doing something we think is 80% right to 90% right, actually over 5 years, that compounds massively.
How do you think like the overall, I guess, level of risk aversion plays into it?
There's definitely a mixture across the kind of businesses that I meet and my clients in terms of how risk averse each of them are. I usually I end up in a weird position where I almost end up trying to kind of play the balancing item on that. So the ones that are really kind of, we're going to go for it, everything's going to be fine, we're off. I try and be a bit more pessimistic in my thinking to sort of level that out. And then equally, I've got the other end of the spectrum where, there's a bit more risk averse, kind of, driving to break even, or some of them even at break even. And then I'm like, no, why don't we do this? Why don't we push one? And again, it's just to sort of, usually the answers in between. I think in general, it's kind of weird startup land, because I think in general, kind of UK and EU, we're a little bit more risk averse than our kind of US counterparts. But there are still a lot of businesses that sort of push forward, and really do want to kind of grow as quickly as they can. I always try and sort of think how everyone says, oh, I was interviewing someone the other day that was potentially going to join one of my clients, and he was asking the question of like, are you going to raise another round? Are you in that sort of steady growth, or are you in the sort of bet the house phase? And I said, well, we're happy to take on risk, but I don't know why we would bet the house if we could get enough data from just like betting a couple of bricks, right? Like you don't need to go all in on stuff. You
Right.
know, the framework I like to use and what kind of resonates with most of my clients, regardless of which end of the risk spectrum they're on, is how can we risk as little as possible to get the data as to whether something's going to work or not? And then if it does work, at that point you can go, yeah, we'll put it all on that. But the kind of odds should be a little bit more in your favor by that point.
So you mentioned in the pre-episode notes that you yourself had to break out of this whole, just get a job, don't take risks type of education mentality, whatever you want to call it. Like, how did you manage to, like, I guess, step out of it and see it for what it was, that it was some sort of just like preconditioning, really?
I think like everything, it was just like my experiences sort of kind of taught me that the hard way. So like when I finished uni, I joined a bank on their graduate scheme, and I did like 3 or 4 different placements there. And every single placement, it was big, big bank, one of the top 4 in the UK. And every single placement I was on, there was a restructure with people losing their jobs. Like obviously as a graduate, I kind of avoided that, but I quickly realized like actually it's not really the size of the company that determines job security, which was definitely something that was kind of semi-instilled with me from my parents that had obviously kind of, come from a different world and a different generation of like, get a job at a big company, there'll be loads of opportunities. I quickly realized actually it was the growth, or in that case with the bank that I joined, the contraction of the business that actually led to sort of job security. So through my career, I've ended up working for smaller and smaller organizations as I've kind of gone through that, obviously kind of culminating in terms of setting up my own business at the back end of 2024. I always feel like the risk isn't, there's 2 things that are at play. There's kind of actual risk and then there's perceived risk. And I think
Mhm.
anything we do that's new, there's a higher perceived risk of it. Like it's kind of like flying, isn't it? Like flying is statistically the most safest mode of transport. But every time you get on a plane, it feels a bit strange because you get in your car every day, but you might only get on a plane 4 or 5 times a year, right? And I kind of feel like that's similar to the job market. Like I was in a paid salaried job before I kind of set up on my own. And then it's like, oh, it's scary. You've got to find clients. You've got to do this. You've got to do the other. And it is scary when you jump. And I spent probably 6 months thinking I was going to leave before I did leave, which actually helped in terms of I kind of, I could shift my thinking a little bit and
Right.
spend the evenings and the weekends kind of looking at how do I get to where I want to be. So it felt a bit more de-risked. But then as soon as you land 3 or 4 clients, it feels way less risky than being in a job. Because if you're in a job, your employer can make you redundant tomorrow and you've lost 100% of your income. I'd have to be quite unlucky that 4 clients kind of let me go at the same time now. So yeah, I guess just a little bit it happens, kind of happens to you. And I think lots of learning that was kind of thrust upon me. But then in terms of the one bit that I think people can maybe take away of how they can make some decisions, it is really trying to force yourself to think of what's actual risk and what's perceived risk, because the actual risk is usually way less than what you think it is.
So now it's been a year. Are you still satisfied with your decision to go out on your own?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like I'm in a way better space. Professionally, sorry. It gives me more free time that kind of personally. Yeah, kind of really happy as well. Went away for whole of August, which was good. Went abroad for that. Worked the mornings while I was out there. So it's kind of slightly different to when you're employed and you just take these kind of week or 2 little gaps out. But
Right.
yeah, location flexibility is great. Yeah, the kind of time flexibility too. So yeah, thoroughly enjoying it. I'm not sure I'll do it forever. I think there's a part of me that still has that itch of like, do I want to set something up on my own, or do I want to go full time in something that's like really, really early stage? Because I think, leaving VC to do what I do now, more of the fractional stuff, you're more in the action, but you didn't arrive on day one. You didn't take all the kind of risk that the founders did. So I'm
Right.
kind of getting closer to it, but that's been in fact, it was one of the realizations while I was away in August of, I do think at some point I want to either get into something very early or potentially start something myself, but just got to fit in with life. I think the next couple of years, especially because I've got a young family, what I'm doing now is great because it gives me some extra kind of flexibility. But yeah, maybe I don't think I'll be doing the 996, but yeah, maybe when she gets a little bit older and she's at school, it will then be how do I kind of dive back in and go full on just in one business. Because I think that'll be the ultimate goal.
That makes sense. When you are on the verge of making a big decision like this, do you consult anybody? Like, do you have maybe like a inner circle or something? Or is it really just a process that you just kind of, the only person who helps you is you?
No, I definitely consult a lot of people on it. So obviously at home, speak to my wife a lot about work stuff. I also been working with a therapist for the last 3 or 4 years. So that's like a really good sounding board again, kind of forcing that what's actual risk, what's perceived risk discussion. And then there's probably half a dozen people in my kind of close network that do similar stuff to what I do, like in the startup world, kind of fractional advisory bits. I usually kind of get their soundings as well. I'm one of the people that really believes that you need to make the decision yourself, but the more data you can put into that, the better that it is. And sometimes 75% of people might tell you not to do something and you decide you want to do it anyway, right? Because there's only you that's got that whole piece of the story. But I think the more people you can ask as to like, even like when I was setting up on my own, like, how do you do, what have you got to do, right? And then it's like website, company's house, accountant, blah, blah, blah. Like you then know, oh, okay, this is going to take me like a little bit of time. And then people are like, oh, you need to land your first couple of clients, and then then you get into that really weird balance of you trying to do delivery, so you stop doing like the networking and the business development, and then that flips back. So even if you take on all the negatives and go, I'm going to do it anyway, at least you're going into that knowing kind of what the future might look like. So yeah,
Right.
no, I'm a big believer in getting as many views as you can whenever you're making even some small decisions. I usually kind of soundboard quite a bit.
What it sounds like you're saying is, and I think I've heard it in like a slightly different version, is that so I used to work with a coach, and when I was on the verge of making decision, he was like, well, like imagine like what's going to happen if it doesn't work out. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to be horrible, bad things are going to happen. He was like, okay, but like what is actually going to happen? I was like, well, I'll lose some money. He was like, okay, and then what? And I was like, and that would be it. So basically naming the actual thing that's going to happen, and it's probably not going to be the fact that you're going to die or somebody else is going to die. It's like that just removes this whole, I guess, like horrible anticipation of it, because in reality, like 99% of things that we're doing are never going to have like super great grave consequences. And I think that's what really helps people like with taking the leap of faith.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, the mind often jumps to like the worst case scenario, doesn't it? Like, oh, I want to leave a salaried job to set up my own business. Oh, well, if I do that, then what might happen is I might not get any clients, and then I won't get any clients, so I won't have any money, and I won't be able to pay my mortgage. And then I'll be living on the street, and then I won't adapt to that, and then oh my God, it'll be winter, and I'll be dead. And you're like, that's one version of the story, but actually the other one could be, I'm going to try this for 6 months. I've got 12 months worth of runway in the bank, and actually, if after 6 months I've not been successful, I'm going to go back and try and find a job. And all else being equal, unless there's a massive economic meltdown in the meantime, you should be able to get a job that's paying broadly what was paying when you left. So, yeah, it's not the reality that sometimes our brain tries to make us think it is.
Do you think this whole, I guess, like having super high consciousness about your personal runway, and I think like people outside of, startup world probably don't even use the word runaway, but like understanding of how much money you have and how long it's going to last you, is that like a huge piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, it helps. I mean, I think it's different for like what I do as more kind of selling consulting services, because I feel like that's easy to monetize quite quickly. Oh, not easy, simple, if not if not easy. Like there's
Right.
a kind of defined route, right? And the feedback cycle will be pretty quick, because if you're not got any clients in 3 to 6 months, you're doing something wrong. So you probably don't need infinite runway. If you're going to try and build like a product business, if you're trying to hardware especially, but even like software, you think you might take 6 months to get your first customer, could be 3 years, right? You think it might take a year to do your first round, could be three. Like there's a lot of different variables in that. So I think if you're trying to kind of build something that's more a scalable business, that isn't ultimately kind of selling time for money, I think you need a very long runway. Because if not, there's nothing worse than being like, if it's going to end up being, let's just say, a 3 year journey, you don't want to run out of money after 2 years, because you've not actually even had the data then to prove out whether it's going to work or not.
Right.
Yeah, the kind of, the sort of solo founder businesses, I think, are a little bit easier.
I think you just said a very interesting thing. So basically said, if it's say you're in the service business and 3, 6 months from now it's not working, doing something like something that you're doing is wrong. Like how do you unpack that? Like how can you put your finger on the actual thing that is not happening, that is not working? Because there is like a multitude of things, right, that need to work. Do you think there is a process to that?
Good question. I'm sort of thinking this. You've stumped me a little bit in this one. I'm kind of thinking as I'm talking, but how it'd just be a series of A/B tests, wouldn't it? So if um, if you're not getting clients, you can probably pick out the 5 or 6 big things that it could be. Pricing, well, it's your classic marketing stuff. It's the 6 Ps, isn't it? Which I won't remember all of off the top of my head, but it's either kind of how have you got the skills to do that? You can probably validate that quite quickly. And I think most people will not leave a job unless they've figured that bit out. Then it's, are you finding clients and getting into where are things falling out in the hopper? If you're not meeting anybody, you've probably got a network and business development problem. If you're meeting loads of people, but you're not converting, either something isn't landing in the messaging or your pricing's wrong. Or there's probably a couple of other bits, but again, kind of don't necessarily come to mind straight away. But it's trying to work out where in the process things are falling out, and then it's easier to identify there's 3 or 4 different variables there, and then just trying to kind of market test that and validate it.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced in the last year of trying to grow your own business?
Um, Honestly, it's not been that hard for me. And I don't mean that flippantly. I think I've been really lucky. As a VC investor, you spend, 50, 60% of your week networking. So when I left, I had a really strong kind of landing pad where I knew a lot of people. I was lucky from the stuff I'd done on LinkedIn as well. I had like quite a big network there. And I kind of get back to, I only ever needed 3 or 4 clients. And when before I handed my notice in, I made sure I had at least 2 lined up. So it was kind of like, you know, just getting to that sort of break even ish kind of number, and then that gave me the confidence to leave. And then within 2 weeks, I signed another 2 clients, and it was, it was brilliant. So that bit I found relatively straightforward because I was lucky from the job that I'd left. And then I guess the 2 bits that are maybe challenges. I saw it's been a while since I've won any new clients, but I've not actively been trying to do that because my current clients are ongoing and retained for a good period of time. So I don't know whether that might present a challenge. If one of them was to roll off, I'd then have to start semi-cold. But at the moment, that's not a problem, and there's been quite a bit of growth within the clients that I work with as well. And then the other bit is, how do you break out of that selling your time for money, right? Because it's
Right.
great. Eventually you run out of days and there's a ceiling on day rate. And then you start to think about, what comes next and how do you start to productize some of it, which, I've definitely got some ideas for. But you're in that kind of chicken and egg of how do you find the time to do some of that stuff. So yeah, that's probably the next bit on my, if I could try and think about what I want to do and what I want to try and achieve in 2026, if I could do a bit more productizing, then that would be a good year.
So you're quite active on LinkedIn. Is this then just part of some mental gymnastics? So is it you laying the small foundation for whenever you really need to start, I guess, lead generation?
Um, yeah, a little bit. So I have a plan with most things. I don't really have a plan with LinkedIn. So I started posting on LinkedIn because I was frustrated with the business, with the output from the marketing team of the business that I worked for at the time. And I'd kind of challenged that for a little period, and then it's quite hard, right? If you're not a marketer, everyone's an expert in marketing, right? And if you're not a
Right.
marketer, you kind of get told to leave it to the experts. And in the end, I was like, I'm just going to have a swing at this, right? Like, see if I can get this, see if I can do something, on my own that will generate leads and generate inbound activity. And as a VC, I guess it's that, but it's also about how are you seen as the person that someone wants to work with. So you'll see like 1,000 decks, you'll discount 990 of them, and there's 10 that you really want to do. And then the dynamic changes because the 10 you want to do usually are the best deals, and the best deals have got choice. So it's less, for me, when I started it was less about kind of deal flow. It was more about deal activation. How does someone decide they want to work with me instead of another VC? And I always thought the best bank of data was, here's how I think about business, here's how I think about life. It's all on my LinkedIn. Go and read my last 30 points and 30 posts and figure out if you think I'm the kind of person, you can go on a 10, 12 year journey with, whatever that will be, up to kind of an exit. So that's why I kind of started it. And then it just become a habit. Like I was kind of posting every day. I've had a few times where I've sort of, turned it down a little bit, but broadly for the last like 3 years, I've just been posting every day. I enjoy it. I've met some really interesting people on it. I always feel like it's like like I don't monetize it. I don't advertise for it. Very few people actually kind of know, unless you go to my profile to read what I do. Like I don't really talk about the work I do with clients. Because I've always been a bit nervous about actually pushing and selling. It's just been like, just trying to build a brand. And I still feel like even after 3 years, I'm like very early on that. So I've tried to not kind of push any of the other stuff, but at some point it's got to be useful, right? To have a good network and, hopefully be someone that people kind of like and listen to. And yeah, just see where it leads from there.
Honestly, I love that take on it because obviously from our conversation sounds like you plan and assess a lot of things. So I was wondering if there was, some magic formula behind it. But honestly, it's like refreshing to just hear somebody say, well, you know what? I'm just testing it out without all this like crazy frameworks and formulas, etc. Because it does seem like there is a specific formula for it to work on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've seen people grow their LinkedIn way, way quicker than I have. Like, I think I have like 25,000 followers after 3 years of posting every single day. I've seen people do like nothing to 100,000 in 12 months, right? Like there is a way of systemizing it, but it's kind of like how famous do you want to be and then what do you want to be famous for? And if you
Right.
like, you can kind of gamify stuff and people go, "Oh, that's interesting." And enough people have seen it. So it kind of gathers a bit of momentum. But when people are talking about your content, it's like, yeah, it's kind of the same as everybody else's. It's cool. They've grown a lot. They've grown a lot of followers, but I don't really listen. There's not deep and it's not kind of meaningful. That's really not what I want to kind of build. I'm happy to have a much smaller network, but I quite like it when I come off a meeting with someone and they go, "You're just the exact same as like your LinkedIn." And I'm like, "Yeah, there you go. That's the guiding. That's probably the one guiding principle. That there's an actual marry up between the person in real life and the person that's online."
No, but I've surely seen people have different personalities on LinkedIn, and then like you see them in real life, and you're like, okay, you don't talk like that at all.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that, especially nowadays, right? There's a lot of people ghostwriting and chat GPT and all that other stuff. But yeah, it's like one post a day. It takes me 5 minutes. I'll probably do like, 5 other comments when I'm on there. So for 15, 20 minutes a day, it's actually, a lot of people say, "Oh, how do you find the content? How do you do this? How do you do that?" It's actually not that much work when you get into it. It's really hard the first few months, but once you've been doing it a while, you just get a bit of muscle memory with it.
I think people just don't realize how many things they can actually turn into content. It's like, for example, from obviously what I'm seeing from you, and that's how I got to know you, is that I saw this like really cool insights, just like insight snippets. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And actually makes you want to comment because you do sound like a real person just sharing, what happened in your experience. Doesn't sound like all of those, yeah, I don't know, comment for this amazing framework that's going to get you 100,000 clients in 24 hours. And because my feed is somehow full of this stuff.
Yeah, mine's very full of that kind of stuff at the moment, and it's quite like wide-reaching stuff. It's not like, I still think venture's relatively niche. Like a lot of stuff I see is like, say, that kind of buy this course and get 100,000 followers tomorrow. Okay, you have 10,000 followers. So why are you not following your own framework sometimes? But
Exactly. No, I like the fact that you're not giving this like vibe advice that usually like most of the VCs are giving, and that stuff that just gets a lot of likes and comments like, yeah, hire good people, or don't fundraise too early, and everybody's like, yeah, man, that's that. And I'm like, come on, like, is there anything fresh here?
yeah, you know what's weird though? I think there's definitely an echo chamber on LinkedIn in the kind of VC space. So I kind of change. I don't necessarily like my kind of headline on my bio where it says like former VC, because I'm kind of like, well, what am I doing now, right? So I kind of few weeks back, I changed it to actually what I was doing now, and my engagement died. And when I say died, I mean like my follower growth went down by 50%. My engagements went down by like 80%. Like
Oh
stuff that was
wow.
getting like a normal post, an average post would get like 5 to 10,000
Just
impressions.
because you changed the headline?
Yeah, and then I changed my headline and I was getting less than 1,000 because it didn't say former VC, so it was just helping father scale their business, something along those lines. Changed it back, and my impressions and my engagement came straight back. Right, so the VCs that are putting
Wow.
content out, they're getting a lot of positive responses on it. not necessarily because people agree or disagree with the content. And I'm not. There's some VCs that post some amazing stuff, like Adam at episode 1 as an example. Like that's like really kind of deep, analytical, data driven stuff. So I'm not talking about that, but there's a lot of people that just post clickbaity stuff and then they get hundreds of thousands and likes and impressions and everything else. Really, it's just from founders that want cash off them, right? It's a very weird ecosystem.
But I think VC in general is like not a very vocal crowd on LinkedIn. So I think having the voice actually like puts you forward, because it's um I think in the niche where I'm trying to break into right now, basically like the art and science of decision making, there are like literally you can count people with fingers on two of your hands who are actually like vocal about that subject. So on the one hand, it does give me the upside of being in this like super small niche. On the other hand, it's actually a huge downside, because people like there is like lack of awareness on the subject that actually I guess the process of decision making is what literally defines most things in our lives, but like
Yeah.
nobody thinks about it this way.
Yeah, agreed. And I think again, like without kind of being too negative on kind of UK and Europe, where I live and building my business, like the amount of VCs that I meet from the US that invest quite heavily in terms of coaching and mentoring for their founders, that's just like non-existent in the UK. And a lot of great founders go out and kind of do that for themselves, which is amazing. But I think we're missing a trick there, because like you say, we make decisions based. You asked me about the, kind of how did I get to the point where I decided that working for a big business wasn't, great. It was just kind of forced upon me, right? But you see, so all of all the decisions we make today are based on kind of stuff that's happened to us in our past, but we often struggle to make the link between the two, and then
Right.
kind of making decisions where you're doing what you think's right, but you don't necessarily know why you think that's right. So the more you can kind of go back and unbox that, then yeah, I think that will just lead to better outcomes.
Speaking of, all the different boxes that can shape decisions, there is, I guess, a really big category called bias. And you mentioned in your pre-show notes that you think that confirmation bias is one of the like biggest decision traps that could happen. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it happens in a lot of places, like VC, classic one, right? So you meet a founder, you meet a lot of founders. There's one that you really like and you're really sold on. You come off the call. Usually, it's probably an extrovert that's indexed quite high for
Right.
sales and painting a kind of rosy picture of the future. They could have obviously often have a great business as well, but the ones that get you excited, right? And then you come off and you're like, okay, so how do I start to validate this? Well, I know this person that knows that market. It's kind of similar to this. Let me look at that. And then actually within a couple of days, you've spoke to a few people and oh, I really like this. And then the fourth or fifth person goes, no, there's a fundamental hole in the business and it's this. And you're like, but I wasn't really looking to hear that. Like I'd made my decision, right? And I think that happens a lot. And I think it happens a lot with founders. Like there's the kind of boiled frog analogy, which I end up kind of talking about a lot, where like if I don't know if you've seen it, but if you put a frog in boiling water, it will jump straight out. But if you put a frog in lukewarm water and gradually turn it up, it will boil to death and die, because it hasn't realized that it's got too hot to the point where it can't survive. And I kind of feel like most decisions are made like that. Like it's not a kind of big decision. It's usually not what you do. It's just that gradual, we've always done this. This is kind of how we're thinking about it. And then you do kind of seek that. Well, it's kind of working. We're growing a little bit. It's, the team's doing okay. But then there's usually something fundamental where you go, I've missed that. Like, and I've been missing this for 2 years, but you just haven't seen that. You haven't seen a reason why. Um, so yeah, it happens. I think it happens all the time. And it happens a lot with, we'll just keep doing what we're doing because we're growing, right? So,
Right.
if we grow 5% month on month, that's great. But it might not be, because there might be something which would help us grow 10 or 20. So yeah, it's a hard one.
How do you think people can break through that? And I guess the classic definition of confirmation bias is when you have already made a decision, really, you're just looking for ways to support it rather than seeking the opposite, the evidence for the opposite.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, you've still got to be willing to gather more data. But I think even if you've got to a point where you've made a decision, you'll gather more data, and the exact, definitely, like I say, definition of confirmation bias, you're just going to pick out the bits that support your thesis. But in terms of breaking out of it, I think it's just a mindset. And again, you probably only learn that mindset through making the wrong decisions and then going, I don't want to do that again. I think there's a lot that businesses can do culturally to get to the point where we kind of break that confirmation bias. Because there's a few bits where you sort of see it and someone makes a decision and then they're almost too deep in that decision that they can't come back out of it because they've got to admit that they've done something wrong. Where I think if we built a framework in a lot of businesses where there's accountability, but there's not blame. And you can go, actually, I've sunk 3 months on this feature, but I did that because that was learning to get to this point. And now I know what I know now. We probably shouldn't ship this because it doesn't work in the way we think it will, or our customers don't no longer need it in the way they think they will, or ChatGPT's released yet another version of X, and that means that it's not. I think if we can get, they kind of go hand in hand. I guess you've got confirmation bias, but you've also got that kind of sunk cost fallacy. I think
Right.
the confirmation bias is hard, and people just on an individual basis have to try and avoid it. And there is a bit of learn from doing there. But I think if organisations can get things in a place where you're not punished for the sunk costs that you've got to that point, then it becomes a bit easier to avoid. Yeah, I'm just going to look for the positives in this and keep doing it.
Yeah, I think confirmation bias is one of the like hardest traps to get out of because it requires, I think, a very high level of like self-awareness or self-consciousness for you to basically step out of yourself and like look at
Yeah,
it from a very objective perspective.
yeah, yeah. And it was a tough challenge when I was in VC because you've also got the fact that there's no perfect information, right?
Right.
So
Right.
and you've got to make a decision. And in VC, like there's two schools of thought, isn't there? You don't want to do stuff, you don't want to do deals that end up not being successful. But the biggest cost is not being in the deals that have been successful. It's a kind of, it's a game of chasing outliers. So then you're indexing even higher for confirmation bias, right? Because you're trying to think that everything's going to be amazing. So yeah, like you say, a lot of self-awareness, probably a really good coach, and I do
Mhm.
think to have felt the pain of getting it wrong to then go, yeah, I'd rather feel uncomfortable by the fact that I've worked on something and then I've disproven what I was doing, than I've gone all the way with it and I've got it wrong. So
Yep.
it's probably a long journey.
I think it's like when the baby learns to walk, they gotta get some bumps.
Yeah,
Otherwise, never gonna happen.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Kieran, has been an amazing conversation. You've honestly like spoken my language when you just dropped the sunk fallacy, sunk cost fallacy, and all that. I was like, oh my god! And like I told you, like I think 10 minutes ago, that it's been a struggle for me to like find people who actually like into the subject and understand some of the terminology, because most of the time people are like, oh no, this sounds theoretical, we don't need that. And I'm like, this is the basics. Let me ask you this, my favorite final question. If you could go back maybe like 5 years ago and tell that Kieran one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Um, I don't think there'd be a lot on the career front because I'm happy with where I've got to. So there would have been a lot of ways of getting there quicker, but I kind of go, if I've got to where I'm happy, I don't need to worry about the past. So there won't be too much advice there. But the one superpower that I've kind of seen while I was, especially while I was an investor and sat on a lot of boards, it was calm. Like I have this picture of this. I was on a board with this lady called Alex, and she someone had been quite, this is my view, very kind of completely lost it sort of type of thing, very direct, and she was just the calmest person I've ever seen, and she just had so much credibility on the back of it, and for the past kind of 4 or 5 years, everything I've been trying to work towards has been just be as calm as you can, because see, in a stressful situation, as soon as you calm, everyone stops, everyone listens to you, and it's really hard to do, right? So that's been the thing I've been working on for a long period of time. If I could go back and start that process earlier, I definitely would have done.
I love that. So it gives a lot more meaning to that. What's the phrase? Keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's almost like keep calm and be credible, because the person that starts screaming in the board meeting, no one's listening to them anymore. They've lost control, they've lost credibility. But the person that just completely diffuses it, does it with a smile on the face, and then continues to reaffirm their point, not kind of being walked over. But yeah, just again, like I said, I've always got that one image in my mind of like that's where I need to get to, just a complete level of zen, take nothing personally. And I'm not all the way there by any means, but yeah, that's one of the things I'd love to start as
I think
early.
I'll have to be a Buddha to be all the way there.
Yeah,
But I think you're making a super important point. It's like you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to actually make a point. It's the opposite.
yeah, yeah. Agreed.
Whew. You just gave me a really good reminder to myself that sometimes you just gotta keep calm, because I also have two small kids, so keeping calm is a freaking superpower.
Yep. Yeah, no, I can vouch for that. Kids help with that, right? Like I've
Exactly.
got a 6-year-old. He definitely helps with that, because the thing is, I think one of the bits where you get stressed is like I'm someone that likes to spot inefficiencies with things. So if something's not working, I'm like, well, if I was doing that, I'd do it this way, and then I almost start to get annoyed as to why they're not doing it that way.
Right.
Whereas when you have a kid, you go, they're so tiny, right? Nothing's their fault. It's all your fault, and you kind of start from that as a principle, which is easy to do because they're this like cute little baby that you love to pieces. But actually, when you can start to push that on like adults and professionals and people in the world, where you go, they're just who they are. They're going to kind of make their decision, and all I can do is kind of be as calm as possible around it. Yeah, I've probably learned as much from my daughter as she's learned from me.
How old is she?
She's nearly 2.
Okay.
She's nearly 2. So we get into that. No, 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 no. Just say
Welcome to
no.
the terrible twos.
There's definitely I really enjoyed the chat, because I love like psychology stuff, like a lot of my favorite books are like Factfulness and Outliers and things, Prisoner of Geography and things like that. I've lost my thread now. I've lost my thread. I can't remember what I was saying.
Which one?
What was you on? Terrible Twos. Oh yeah, but there's something where I've picked up where there must be something in our brain that's hardwired to say no, because kids learn it at such a young age. But also, I've noticed with my daughter, she'll say no and she'll still do it. Like, do you want to put your toys away before bed? No, and then she pick them up and put them away. It's like, what happens in our brain where our default is we're not doing that?
It's so it's like they go through this phase where they're learning to push the limits. So I've got two kids,
Okay.
and they're 3 and 5, and trust me, they I think Lauren not only pushed their limits, but mine as well. But once you kind of like get to the bottom of it, and you actually, because it was driving me crazy, and I looked into it and I was like, oh, they're just supposed to do it. So just you take it so much easier. You're like, oh, it's okay. It's like they're supposed to do this. So it's totally fine. They're not testing me. It's like that's how their brain is wired. But this
Yeah.
is very interesting, because I think as we grow up, we just kind of we lose that ability naturally or not. But it's just a lot of people don't know how to say no, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. No, agreed. I think we're due. The next phase is questions. You probably had it already, but I think we're not. We're going to move out the no phase and get the why phase. So
Exactly. Now that one is funny, because like you would explain something to them and they'll be like, okay, but why? And like, but this is actually really cool for business, because that's how you should treat your business. Like, okay, but why? But why? And once you
yeah.
get to the bottom of the bottomest why, this is where the real answer comes out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's something. What was that? I think it was a more beautiful question, and that said that like I think there's something. I don't know the exact stat. I'm going to misquote this, but it was something along the lines of like 80% of the times you asked why was between X and Y age, and by the time you get to a certain age, you stop questioning stuff. But the problem is that's where you just start, your brain fills in the blanks. Then doesn't it? It doesn't ask why. It just assumes the right bit of information's there, and it often isn't.
Exactly. Well, it's been a pleasure having you
Yeah, I've enjoyed
on.
it.
Last question. Sorry, I got so carried away with the kid subject. What's the best people for way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. Yeah, just kind of connect, drop me a message. Yeah.
And we're dropping everything in the show notes as usual. So guys, you'll get Kieran's LinkedIn link in the notes. And if you want to connect, just drop him a connect request.